Well, it's with great pleasure that I welcome Liz and Laura to talk about their career stage framework. So over to you two.
Thank you very much, Gwyneth, and lovely to be with all of you today at the CDE event. And as Gwyneth has said, we will be talking about the career stage framework, supporting students where they are in their employability journey. My name is Laura Brammar, and I'm a senior careers consultant who works with the University of London Careers Service, supporting our distance and flexible learners. And I'm joined today by the marvellous Liz Wilkinson. Want to say hi, Liz?
So hello, everybody. And I work with Laura with distance and flexible learners. And I also work with researchers and research students elsewhere in the University of London.
So just to give you a tiny bit more context about why we're talking in this capacity, if we go to the next slide, I'll just say a little bit about our background in terms of what we feel we can offer to this. So I'm pleased to say that the work that Liz and I have been doing in this space has been successful, not least because we both feel that the work we're doing with our distance and flexible learning students is some of the richest in terms of our professional practice. And it involves us designing, developing and delivering a wide range of live career development activities for undergraduates and postgraduates, but also producing asynchronous materials as well. We were lucky enough to be rewarded for getting a Roger Mills Prize for Innovation in this space. And also we've been involved in getting other awards around kind of careers practice and employability development within our professional sector as well. Our work's been published in this sphere, and together we've worked out we've got a combined experience of over 50 years in this space, which I suppose is an illustration of how passionate we both are about helping our students not only think about their career development as soon as they graduate from our institutions, but also thinking about how we can equip them to be lifelong career managers going forward. And indeed, it's that depth and diversity that in many ways links to the specific topic that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so moving on. So what is the context of the career stage framework? Well, when I say University Careers Service to most of you, wherever you might be based, and it's wonderful to have people joining us from around the world, I think it's fair to say that many university career services within higher education tend to be geared understandably towards students with limited amounts of work experience, because that tends to be the typical picture that we experience with our client group. They may have done some part-time work, they may have had some internships, but in terms of the sort of longer term career development, they're very much at the sort of early stages of their journey. But in reality, in terms of flexible and distance learning students, part-time students, indeed some postgraduate students, many of them actually already have extensive experience in the workplace. And it's important, I think, that we ensure that we're tailoring our support appropriately, because if not, there is a potential disconnect where we as an institution and as a career and employability special service are presuming where we know our students to be on the employability journey, when in actual fact, they're at a much different place and they've already had quite an exposure to the labour market and have already to some extent begun that career reflection process. And in terms of the cohort of students I'm talking about today, and Liz's as well, we're talking about 45,000 students literally based across the globe. And great, Magdalena, to see that you've been able to participate in some of the sessions. How wonderful. Thanks for the feedback. And so they're not only diverse in terms of their geographical location and their cultural experiences, but they're also very diverse in the extent of their workplace experience. Not least when we've been working extensively with our students since 2018, it became clear to us that we were seeing kind of trends and patterns in the amount of work experience that our students were referring to. In our global virtual classroom, in webinars and drop-in sessions such as the one that Magdalena is referring to, this was a sort of birthplace really for what we've led to describe as the career stage framework, which is what we'd like to talk a little bit more about today. So what is it? Well, essentially, it's about segmenting our students into 3 distinct groups, which each relate to different stages of career journey. The first group is perhaps a group that is more commonly what we discover in higher education, as I was mentioning, which are career starters. So career starters are students of ours who are pretty much at the beginning of their career journey. They may have had some limited work experience, but they're using their qualification with the University of London essentially to launch their career development. And so a lot of the work that we do with them, as we're going to explain a little bit later, is perhaps most closely aligned to the work that many higher education career services do with their cohorts. But then there's a second group, and these are what we describe as career developers. Now, career developers are those students who actually already have some experience, sometimes quite substantial experience, and they're wanting to enhance their career going forward. It may well be that they are hoping to apply for a more senior role. Maybe they want to work with a larger team. Perhaps they want to work with a larger organization. Perhaps they're seeing this qualification as a way of facilitating a promotion intention that they've had for a while. So that's their context. But then the third group, which is particularly interesting in relation to, again, the diversity of these students, is the group we describe as career changers. And these are the students who sometimes have significant amounts of work experience, sometimes many years working within a particular sector. But their focus, their purpose of their studies is to pivot or to change their career direction. And that might be changing in the direction of working for themselves. It might be changing the direction in terms of something completely different to their current career trajectory, or it could be moving slightly in a different direction. So let's have a look at how we could illustrate this perhaps a little bit more clearly. So as we can see, we've got different work profiles, but we've also got different likely objectives. And this is important because you can imagine that if you were a career changer and you were to attend some careers education that was working under the presumption that you had very limited work experience and had no concept of kind of the graduate level employment market, then that wouldn't land particularly well. But at the same time, it may be that you would really benefit from some of the introductory work about different types of sectors and different types of directions if you're looking to perhaps move into a sector that you've got limited work experience in thus far. Equally, if you're a career developer, you may be looking for some careers in employability education that very much speaks to the fact about it's important that you market your existing levels of experience appropriately. How can you make sure you're positioning yourself effectively for those more senior roles? And of course, because we have these three groups, we're also then able to think about how those groups might support each other and learn from each other. So there's a significant peer-to-peer aspect, which we'll be talking about briefly. So how do we use it? Well, we use it in so many different ways. And I think it's fair to say that we're discovering new ways of using it all the time, which is one of the beauties of the whole thing, to be quite honest. It's important to say we use it to actively design our sessions. We're really appreciative of the fact that our students have invested their time and resources and energy into these qualifications, and we want to make sure they get as much return on that investment as possible. So we design our sessions in mind with those three distinct groups. So we'll badge those groups appropriately. So if you're a career changer, you'll see there'll be actual webinars designed specifically to you and so forth. And Liz will be going into a little bit more detail in that in a second. But we also think about our asynchronous material as well in terms of when we're considering how to build the content appropriately. But it's not only in how we design our sessions, it's also how we deliver our sessions. We actively encourage our students to refer and self-identify as one of the three cohorts. And I'm pleased to say they do. So you'll have a student who will say, hello, I'm Mary, I'm based in Malaysia, and I am a career developer, for example. And someone else will say, well, I'm based somewhere completely different, I'm a career changer, and so on. So our students are beginning to associate with what we mean by this framework. But it's not only in the design and the delivery, we also evaluate. So when we collect registration data, so when people register for our webinars or our career drop-in sessions, we ask them to identify where they sit on the career stage framework. And we also collect the same data when we do our evaluation surveys as well. And as I touched on briefly, this material, this framework is also very much used when we build our asynchronous learning materials as well. So in our successful career micromodules, we've got activities that are clearly badged for career starters, career developers, or career changers. So now let's look at this in a bit more detail with you, Liz.
So thank you, Laura. And I hope that you're getting the message from us, which is we get very excited, and we get very excited by data. And I think as I listen to Laura and does everything she says, I think both of us have found this a really exciting framework in helping students create a positive narrative for themselves, as well as helping us deliver more relevant and salient careers education. So let's have a look at some of that careers education. So as Laura said, this framework emerged from our practice of group discussions and one-to-one discussions with students, in that we started to we were listening to see what students said and starting to get a sense of their different stages. And we started to discuss about how we were responding, particularly to our career developers and our career changers. And I think as that emerged, we then articulated the framework. And then in spring 21, we really started thinking we need to stop having the framework that we're discussing between us as professionals and actually bring our students into the conversation to co-create and to check out whether this rings true to them. So this was one of the most significant early interventions that we did, was we put the label on the tin. And we offered these sections. And whereas we often offer all sorts of transdisciplinary and transstage work, well, this one we actually said we're going to talk about the topic of enhancing your experience and how you present it to employers, very core careers topic. And we disaggregated it and labelled it. And the student response was very positive. Registrations was good, participation was good, evaluation was good. And particularly for the career changers, we had people talking about how they felt less isolated, and this had a legitimizing effect. So I thought that was a great sort of, for us thinking, oh, we've got something here. And as Laura said, encouraged us to start bringing this into the student domain, asking them in all sorts of webinars how they'd identify themselves and bring it into this space. But this remains one of our most popular webinar series. And so students were going with that point about the positive narrative. They were finding that an affirmative way to describe themselves, particularly because often people seek career support when they feel they have a problem. If it's all going swimmingly, you don't give me and Laura an hour. So, often the career starters, they're not sure how to get started. They're getting conflicting messages, perhaps from their families. The career developers can't see what they need to do in order to get promoted. They want to ask help. Perhaps we can help them demystify what's the next step of the game. And the career changers are wondering about how to enter a new field. So giving them a positive narrative, I think, has been very affirming for the students. So once we'd had this really positive response from the students, as there was something there, we then wanted more data. And so these little infographics come from the fact that we then built in career stage self-report questions to our registration process for all our events. So this core data set is over 2,000 students. And we asked them these questions, and then we sliced it, as you can see, across programs, across regions, across events. And it's like, someone's just turned on a 100-watt bulb. Because suddenly, Laura and I have 50 years experience. This, of course, means we have 50 years of assumptions. It's always good to check out your assumptions. And so we may look at, well, who is coming to certain event series? Is that a signal that is a very good trans-stage session? Or is it a signal that we should perhaps peel that out and offer something specifically to a stage? And we may have assumptions about regions. And again, as we craft regionally angle material, it's good to know what the actual patterns of who our students are and why they have come to study with us and what they hope it will help in terms of their career and life success. And of course, very, very relevant for conversations with colleagues on programs. And one of the things we're very excited about is the fact that we have now added career stage questions to the all student careers registration that takes place with all students at enrolment. So not only the people who are keen enough to register for our events, I think it's going to be fascinating to compare those trends with all student trends. And as I say, the evidence we keep getting is that students find this an empowering framework. And that's really important to us, that actually it should enable them and in no way, as it were, minimize that it builds them up. It doesn't sort of put them in a box. I think that's also, we're noting some fluid identities. So some of our students, depending on the event they come to, they will sometimes self-report differently, and that's fine. And so actually making sure that we do give them the sense that it can be a fluid identity, because people do move up and down in their career development. That certainly we're getting very strong reinforcements of the message that many of our students doing distance and flexible learning, unsurprisingly, study it for vocational reasons. And therefore it's all the more important that we align our careers delivery to their particular career aspirations and career stage. But most importantly, I think it reminds us that they don't come into the room as empty vessels. I mean, no one ever does, but particularly if your model of career development assumes career starting, then to some extent there is that sense of expert to beginner. Whereas often, people are coming in with substantial careers education that they have developed themselves through their own work experience, bringing that, explicitly valuing it for themselves to help them identify those transferable skills, but also encourage them to share it in peer learning and knowledge transfer. I think that is one of the most impactful ways that this helps make our careers delivery more student-centric. And so how is it changing us? Because I always think in education, the teacher is changed as well as the student. Well, it reminds you that particularly our career developers and career changers, they often have heavy work responsibilities and paid work, so they're really busy. So we must not waste a minute. We must ensure that our careers education is relevant and salient and time efficient. I think that we are now making the targeting and labelling by career stages becoming an embedded part of our practice, always listening to our students to make sure that it is empowering labelling rather than diminishing labelling. And I think, as Laura will say, the next thing we want to take is to help it facilitate more cross-student dialogue and to share it with colleagues, such as our program director, say, let's look at all our student data. How does this help enrich the student experience? And on that note, I'll hand back over to Laura. You're muted, Laura.
Sorry, I think that was the best sentence I said in the whole thing. I'm joking. As Liz was saying and conveying, it's an organic framework to some extent, because we're still learning about it and we're still learning about the ways that we would like to use it and how we could use it to help articulate conversations across our institutions with our academic partners and indeed with our employer partners as well, in explaining the added value that many of our students are able to offer them as experienced hires as much as new fresh graduates. So in terms of the future plans that we're currently working on, really, we're thinking of expanding the entire series. So linking to, I think Magdalena's made an excellent point in the chat about how, part of the careers education aspiration from our side of things is to inform the student body on kind of different processes, different application and recruitment processes that they might have to be exposed to depending on where they're applying for opportunities. So we know things like assessment centres, for example, some of our career starters would really like some additional information around that. So designing a series around specifically those kind of topics. With our career developers, who, as Liz says, may have a clear idea of their career direction, but be less clear on how to illustrate and articulate that achievement. We're looking at developing a series helping them with that. And with career changes, which are again a very diverse group in themselves, as I mentioned, some of these career changes are making a career change for a variety of different reasons. For some individuals, there's been events that happen in their life that have mean they've had to make a career change, whether they've wanted to or not. So looking at how we can support individuals in those kind of career narratives as well is very important. In terms of how we might triage additional support as well. So, of course, what's interesting is we may provide career drop-in sessions specifically for different groups, such as career changes. So this is a career drop-ins, for those of you who don't know, is a chance where the students can come along and pose any careers-related questions to Liz or myself and our colleagues, and we will give our kind of perspective. So it's kind of like small group coaching, actually, which we know from the evaluation has been very popular and well received. But perhaps the greatest potential of this model is there's huge peer-to-peer learning opportunities. So if you think about it, we've almost got a kind of team of industry specialists within our student cohort. So some of our career developers and career changers have got quite significant industrial insights in the very sectors that our career starters are interested in getting into. Equally, some of our career starters are engaging with different technology platforms, etc., perhaps on their course, which they may also want to share and give insight into some of our career changers and developers, depending on what their kind of subject specialism might be. So there's a huge array of different opportunities, and certainly something that we're looking forward to collaborating with our partners closely in the future. So in terms of sort of perhaps things that you may want to reflect on from your own practice and your own context, is perhaps thinking about whether the career stage framework would be applicable in your context. Are there particular programs or modes of study, etc., where you think you'd be more likely to find this sort of level of diversity? Perhaps inviting your students to define their career stage and thinking about how you might use that information. I also think it's important, as we've said, to get a sense of what message is your careers or employability offer, or even your academic program, what message is being conveyed to your students from a careers and employability perspective, particularly to those students who may already have some work experience, and whether or not you're able to kind of apply that and maximize the benefit of that and share the benefit of that between your student body. And again, how can you encourage your students to bring their work experience into the room, that inside knowledge? Because this is, again, is about reminding our students to in terms of their self-efficacy. So much of the work that Liz and I do is about reminding our students of what they're able to do and how they can articulate that effectively. So that, I believe, is all we wanted to say on the topic. Thank you so much for your attention. We really appreciate it.